Got a big hour, got a couple of terrific guests you're going to want to hear from. We don't do a lot of guests on the Mike Gallagher show. A lot of people make the rounds and got kind of the same authors and politicians. I like the stars of the show to be our callers, but a couple of people have really caught my attention. This is something from an organization called the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute is a nonprofit research and educational organization based in Illinois. Coming up, I want you to meet Donald Kendall, who is one of the authors, I believe, of this survey. 17% of mail-in voters admitted that in 2020, they voted in a state where they are no longer a permanent resident. That's fraud. 21% of mail-in voters admitted they filled out a ballot for a friend or a family member. That's fraud. 17% of mail-in voters said they signed a ballot for a friend or family with or without his or her permission. That's fraud. And 8% of likely voters say they were offered pay or a reward for voting in 2020. Coming up, you'll meet Donald Kendall, who's the deputy director of the Socialism Research Center at the Heartland Institute. Real important voice in this conversation because election integrity is the single most important election facing the United States of America. Our guest, Donald Kendall, joins us next. We all know that the 2020 election was unlike any election we've ever witnessed in American history. Millions and millions of people voted by mail due to COVID. Well, along comes a survey that I think is going to absolutely blow your mind. We are really, really honored to be joined by Donald Kendall from the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute, again, is a nonprofit. They're an education organization based in Illinois. Donald's also the host of the In the Tank podcast, which is a weekly video podcast that covers economics, politics, and culture from a free market perspective. And he's got a great pedigree. He served as a researcher and contributor for the great Glenn Beck and his three latest books. It's great having you on the program, Donald. Thanks very much. I know you called the show the other day, and we said, if he's really him, we got to get him on. And you were him. So we verified you, and here you are. I want to begin by asking you two things, whether you were surprised by two things. Number one, were you surprised at what the survey uncovered, which is that 1 in 5 mail-in voters admitted to committing at least one kind of voter fraud during 2020? And number two, have you been surprised at the lack of interest from the mainstream media at what you uncovered?
Yeah, I mean, so to address the first question there, when we came up with the idea, obviously, as you kind of described, there is a lot of kind of questions about the 2020 election, the sheer amount of mail-in balloting, all the COVID-related stuff. And we were wondering about, the amount of fraud that might be associated with the mail-in voting. And we thought, has anyone ever just asked people? So that was kind of the origin of the poll. Maybe we should just ask people.
What a nutty idea! What a nutty concept, huh?
Right.
I mean, you mean I don't have to listen? I shouldn't be lectured to by Anderson Cooper or right. Chuck Todd?
No, exactly. Yeah. And obviously you would think that people would be a little hesitant to admit to fraud over the phone or anything like that. So our questions weren't, did you commit fraud by doing XYZ? We just asked them if they did XYZ. And we thought if we got percentages back that were 5%, because, some of these states, the margins between Joe Biden and Donald Trump were razor thin. So if 5% of people came back and said, we committed fraud doing X, Y, and Z, we thought that would be newsworthy. When we got the results in, and it was 20%, 1 in 5 voters, absolutely blown away. We couldn't believe it. We weren't even sure how we should release the info. It seems so unbelievable. So to answer that question, we are blown away.
Let me, before we get to the second part, the old line about one of the greatest tricks the devil plays is to deny that he even exists. In that same vein, I think one of the greatest tricks the mainstream media has played is to suggest that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud in the 2020 election. Well, for example, when Joe Biden wins the state of Georgia, a key battleground state, by 11,000 votes or 7,000. You don't need widespread election fraud in order to rig an election. How much, you know what I mean? How much? So that's one of the great tricks. Every time they say it, they always say that phrase together. They don't say there was zero fraud. They don't say there was absolute, because of course we know in a nation of 300 plus million people, there were instances of fraud, and your survey proves it. But I'm sure you guys have followed that as well. They're very careful to always say no proof of widespread election fraud.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's kind of I think the biggest takeaway from this poll is this kind of it allows people on, I don't know, say the right side of the aisle, however you want to phrase it, to again question this poll and have ground to stand on. That's not speculatory or based on some video or something like that, because the narrative after the 2020 election was that you can't question the results. You can't question the results at all. If you do, you're a conspiracy theorist at best, or you're a wannabe insurrectionist at worst, right?
And if you do, we're going to destroy your life. We're going to ruin you. We're going to get you fired. We're going to dox you. We're going to make you put a tinfoil hat on your head. You're out of your mind if you dare to question. And the worst part of this, the dirty little secret, is millions and millions and millions of Americans absolutely question the 2020 election.
Absolutely. And this kind of ties into that second part of that question that you asked me, is the kind of the lack of response from the media. Now, of course, the CNNs and the MSNBCs of the world, I wouldn't assume that they would report on something like this. But even some of your more mainstream conservative sites and broadcasts and whatnot seemingly are a little fearful to talk about these results. And I wonder if it has to do with that narrative. You know, I know that there's a certain big broadcasting company out there that got in some legal issues when it came to some questioning election results. So is that the reason why? There's an extreme chilling effect that was installed in our country after the 2020 election. And I think that this poll and the results, how overwhelming they were, chips away at that chilling effect. So what I'm hoping is that this allows more of a conversation about this extremely important idea.
I mean, Trump himself, posted on social media, this is the most important poll released in the last 20 years. It came out yesterday stating that 20% of the mail-in ballots in the 2020 presidential election were rigged or defective. Now, you know what he said in that post on Truth Social, which I'm sure you saw, Donald, which I thought was really riveting. He didn't immediately say, see, I won. I mean, he does say that, of course, when on the campaign trail, but he immediately reiterated something that he has said since this all happened in 2020. You cannot have a fair and honest election as long as there are mail-in ballots. Cheating will always be prevalent, he posted. France and many other countries have stopped the madness. The Republican Party must do something now. Of course, he's right. When I can't tell you how many calls I took in 2020 from people from New York to Florida to California and in between saying, yeah, I got 9 mail-in ballots in the mail yesterday from my 8 dead relatives. It was unbelievable. Double ballots and all kinds of extra ballots. And yet they insist on saying that the 2020 election was safe and secure. And that's a load of hogwash. We all know it. And the Heartland Institute's work confirms this. Our guest is Donald Kendall. He's deputy director of the Socialism Research Center at the Heartland Institute. And of course, before you think that they're advocating socialism, they're about uncovering a socialism and trying to stop it. I am disappointed in the lack of response from conservative media outlets on this. And like you said, I think that everybody is, they're either afraid it's the third rail and they don't want to touch it, or we're just beaten down. We're just so tired of arguing about it. But listen, it seems to be working for Donald Trump. Have you taken a look at any of his polls lately? Everybody seems to be appreciating what he says about election integrity.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And this message is definitely resonating with some element of the conservative movement. I mean, last week I was doing media hits all week on different talk radio and, certain podcasts and all of that. But it seems like kind of the more independent section of the conservative movement is a little bit more likely to say, yeah, let's talk about this. This is a huge thing. Still waiting for calls from certain notable people, but haven't received those yet. And
you've been on Fox. Have you been on Fox News a lot over this?
I have not been on Fox News yet, but
Wonder
yeah.
why they aren't calling. This is right up there. I mean, and listen, we can joke about it and everything, and a lot of people have opinions about Fox and firing Tucker Carlson and all that. But the bottom line is, this is a legitimately important story. This is a huge story. You guys obviously conducted tons of research on this, and I urge everybody to go to heartland.org to look at this survey in depth. See what they're up to, see what they've done, see what they uncovered. But the fact that mainstream media outlets, I mean, let me put everybody on the spot. Has Newsmax reached out to you?
Newsmax, I think they did actually.
Good. How about One American? How about One American News?
Maybe I'm not sure on that one. Yeah, we've got a team.
How about the Wall Street Journal? How about the Wall Street Journal?
The Wall Street Journal? No, I have not seen the Wall Street Journal yet.
I mean, seriously, it's unbelievably depressing to me. And that's part of the problem. When people talk about the uniparty and people talk about, these scary themes like the deep state, I'm sorry. The reason people are conspiracy theorists is exactly this. Look at the lack of response to a huge story that a credible survey is released. This is Rasmussen and the Heartland Institute. You guys aren't pikers. You know what you're doing. 1 in 5 mail-in voters admitted to committing at least one type of voter fraud during 2020. This ought to be the front page story everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a level of like I said, that narrative after 2020, you can't question this, and there's a level of vitriol. There was actually a second part of the poll that we conducted. We released the results the next day, and in it said 48% of Democrat likely voters believe media members who alleged election fraud should be, quote, banned from public speaking, receive prison time, or a combination of both. So I mean, that's what you're up against here. I mean, if you have the audacity to question the idea of having 40% of our votes be mail-in ballots, if you have the audacity to suggest maybe we should check into that, maybe that's not quite in the up and up. There's a half of Democrat voters, want you to be banned from public speaking. I think that might include you.
Yeah, no kidding. And the worst part of it, I've played a montage over and over on my show for the last couple of years. You want to know how many prominent Democrats questioned the outcome of the 2016 election?
Oh, right.
Try all of them.
Right.
I mean, all of them. Hillary and John Lewis and all of them. Down the Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They all said Trump wasn't legitimately elected. The Russians did it. They all did it.
Sure. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the 2000 election with George Bush, there was a question in Florida about mail-in ballots from like troops overseas. And that was a New York Times article questioning the legitimacy of some of these mail-in ballots. So how all of a sudden it's become some third rail, you're not allowed to talk about it just because it had resulted in Biden over Trump.
Yep.
I mean, come on, that's the agenda right there.
That's the agenda. Thanks for the work you guys have done on this. I hope everybody listening and watching goes to heartland.org, and check out the In the Tank podcast with Donald Kendall. Thanks for fighting the good fight, Donald, and thanks for joining us on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Thank you for having me on.